So the Prime Minister thinks this is the third oil shock of our time, but what if even that is optimistic, if it's actually the last? We can speak to David Strahan, the author of The Last Oil Shock, who thinks Gordon Brown has fundamentally misunderstood the problem. Why has he, David?
Basically because I think he doesn't realise, or is not letting on if he does, that the basic problem here is very different from the one that it was in the 1970s. In the 70s it was entirely political. Political crises came and went, the oil supply recovered and carried on expanding, but at that point there was no hint of geological shortage. Today, you look around the world, there are about 100 oil-producing countries, and of those, two-thirds have already peaked, and that's reached their maximum level and then gone into decline. Britain is a prime example.
But that's unfair. He has grasped that, surely. I mean, he is looking long-term. He's talking about nuclear and the need to be more ambitious. He's talking about better insulation for greener homes, better dialogue on oil supplies, on coal, renewables. The rest of it, I mean, that is part of his... Well,
he's doing a lot of talking about it, but I mean, to pick the first couple of items in your list, nuclear power is not going to make the blindest bit of difference to the oil price in the short term, and that was the implication. The government ministers were saying this week repeatedly that if we advertise our long-term plans to diversify our energy supply, it will help moderate the oil price in the short term. Those nuclear power stations aren't going to be online for a decade, and we've first of all got to replace all the ones that we have to close. It's a complete irrelevance. And the enormous song and dance that was made, for instance, about the announcements in the North Sea, I think it smacks of desperation rather than a real appreciation of the problem.
But there is no short-term solution. That's essentially what you're saying.
I think there's no short-term solution which is exclusively concentrates on the supply. The whole point about our approaching geological constraint, peak oil as it's so called, is that you know there isn't a supply-side problem, and that is what I think is absolutely terrifying particularly to Gordon Brown, but to I think anybody in power, is if you accept the finality of the supply-side situation, you've got to do something serious about demand, and of course they're terrified of doing that.
Well, not just terrified. I mean, who wouldn't be? Which politician is going to come up with sort of wartime-like rations and say, no more driving, no more holidays, no more heating your homes? It's just unfeasible.
Well, is it? The Environmental Audit Committee this week said precisely that. They said we should introduce this system of personal carbon trading, which is sort of widely discussed. They said, and I think they're right, that this is absolutely the best way to connect people's personal behaviour with the big problems. Taxes don't do it, people resent them deeply. And in fact, I think that kind of a system could be, properly administered, could be much more effective. But you're quite right. I don't think Gordon Brown particularly is in any kind of political shape to be able to push that kind of a radical idea.
And neither are any of the others. I mean, you don't hear David Cameron saying, yes, we're going to ban flights.
No, that's absolutely true. Both the Tories and the Labour spokespeople came out this week and said, almost as if they were reading from the same bleeper, this is an idea whose time has not yet come.
Yeah, exactly.
But isn't that what leadership is about?
Proceed with care. We don't want to alienate people. We want everyone to be on board. But you know, what sort of political world are you living in where politicians can really suggest those kinds of measures to us?
Well, I think these measures, you either do these things to yourself. I mean, this is the seriousness of the situation, and I think the thing, again, probably that Gordon Brown doesn't get, is that either we're going to do these things to ourselves, or we're going to have them done to us by geological shortage of oil. With the oil supply globally has been absolutely flat for the last 3 years, which is an unprecedented development, and it may well mean that we are approaching real serious geological shortage, after which the oil supply will start to shrink.
So every time we are told that actually working towards a greener planet doesn't mean cutting back on luxuries and enjoyment and all the rest of it, it just means finding alternative ways of getting it, you just don't believe that?
I think that's delusional. I don't think there is any I don't think there's any way through to a sensible strategy on climate change or peak oil which doesn't involve a really serious go at demand. Now, it may be that if you put the right systems in place, actually the behavioural change is so radical that you can actually make these changes rather less painfully than you might fear to start with, but we won't know unless we try.
David Strahan, interesting to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming in. Now,